request you to take over the session and enlighten us.
Thank you, Rama, for your kind words of introduction. I must compliment the participants of your capacity building program because they are joining every day before a busy day and after their busy day. So that really shows their level of commitment. And I'm really looking forward to their participation, their raising issues, points, and certainly the fact that they are joining the program despite their regular engagement shows their keen interest and hopefully some understanding of some aspects of industrial development, which they should bring in the discussion. Uh, see, I must tell you that in India, there are not many institutes that have the database for the industrial sector, particularly the large corporate sector industries, and a good research faculty and a number of research studies, as in ISID, Institute for the Studies in Industrial Development. I think it's one of the very good institutions in the country which have a systematic database and large number of research studies and a very good faculty. I'm mentioning it because the institute owes much of its stature to a dear friend of mine, Professor S.K. Goyal, who just passed away a few weeks ago. I just would like to begin by paying my respect to this great visionary who could think of the need of this institution and established it. Now, coming to this subject of the industrial development in India and what kind of capacities do we need, I must tell you, we have some short-run problems and some long-run problems. We are trying to bring out the economy from the ICU, where it has been put by COVID-19. The economy had almost collapsed for about 6 months. And now that we're trying to rebuild it, we must notice and we must acknowledge that COVID was not fully responsible for the state of affairs that we have in the industrial sector or the manufacturing sector. Please go to the first slide. We know that Indian economy was not doing very well even before March 2020. You take quarter after quarter, you have the growth rates calculated year-on-year basis, and you do find that the growth rate, GDP growth of Indian economy has been contracting for the last 6 or 7 quarters, even before COVID-19 hit us. And to be honest, our manufacturing sector was also not doing very well. So to put the entire responsibility for the collapse of the manufacturing sector on industrial sector on COVID-19 would not be fair. You can see the curve shows the growth rates from quarter to quarter has declined before pandemic. Please go to the next one, which shows the total manufacturing output. You see that the total manufacturing output was going up all right, but there have been, rise and fall. And as far as the growth rate is concerned, you find that after 2010, you see after 2010, the growth rate is shown by the curve, which is below the curve of total production. Total production has, of course, gone up, but it has gone up at a much slower rate. And occasionally, the total manufacturing output did not increase. Whereas, if you look at the growth rates, it was reasonably well during early 90s, 80s, but you find after 2010, the growth rate of the manufacturing sector has been coming down. Now, COVID took Indian industries into a serious crisis. I'll just discuss how badly it affected, but the response that came from the central government in terms of increasing infrastructural investment so that the public investment can attract the private investment. Also, the central and the state government both somehow identified labor as a major constraint on the way of promoting economic growth in the post-COVID period. So the labor codes have been brought in. You must be aware that before the pandemic, the code on wages was passed by the parliament, but during the period of the pandemic, there was not much of a discussion on the three codes on the labor relations, health, and other arrangements within the factory units and social security. All the three were passed, which a large number of scholars believe that these three codes that have been passed by the parliament, both the houses, during the period of COVID, without much discussion, because the opposition was boycotting the parliamentary sessions because of the agricultural protest. And it is generally argued that although the central government codes try to strengthen social security for certain sections of the population, want to bring the you know EPFO benefits and the insurance sector benefit to the larger number of workers, but it's generally believed that it strengthens the hand of the employer, the industrialist vis-a-vis labor, and that the central government thought is absolutely necessary if we want to bring back the industrial growth back to the earlier level. As I mentioned, it is not only the pandemic that led to the crisis, but also even before pandemic, the problem was there. But nonetheless, Reserve Bank of India tried to increase the liquidity by providing cheaper money in the hands of the industrialists, and also there were infrastructural support. There are specific schemes launched by the central government from small and medium industries. Now, as far as the state government is concerned, state government also identified labor as a major factor constraining the growth. So there have been many relaxations in the labor laws so that the industrialists can now resist the workers' protest. The powers of the trade unions have been reduced. I'm talking about the past 1 year. And it is generally believed that if you want to bring back the industrial growth to normal level, you need to really do some reform in the labor market. And there has been attempts to really cut down the rights of the laborers to protest, go for strike, and also see to it that their wages do not go up and the hours of work can be increased. Many of the laws pertaining to the labor have been relaxed in different state government. We will discuss that. But before we come to the measures adopted by the central government and the state government vis-a-vis labor, which in a way strengthens the hands of the industrialist class and would encourage them to make more investment, because the labor problems are not supposed to interfere with the growth process, at least in the next couple of years. We will examine what is the impact, but let us try to understand the Indian economic situation and the industrial crisis in the larger context. As you are all researchers at the university level, I would like to tell you the global context of the Indian industrial crisis. Please go to the next one. As far as the industrial growth in the developing countries are concerned, there's a serious question mark which have been put by Danny Roderick. Danny Roderick is a professor at Harvard, professor of management. He has put the evidence of premature deindustrialization. He has argued on the basis of his extensive work in the developing world that the less developed countries are having a serious problem of deindustrialization, and he calls it premature deindustrialization because the economies in the less developed countries have not really come to a high stage. If in Germany or in Switzerland or in Norway, the contribution of industries in GDP, gross domestic product, or the national income, if the contribution of industries goes down from 60% to 50%, one wouldn't be worried, because after all, they are already industrialized countries, and the service sector is growing up. Tertiary activities, many of the you know activities related with education, health, relaxation may come up. So nothing to worry if the contribution of industries in the income in the developed countries is declining. But if that happens in African countries, if it happens that in India, where only 30% or even less of the income is contributed by industries, and that goes down to 22%, that's a matter of worry. So, what Danny Roderick shows, please go to the next graph, please. You shows that at the global level, the percentage of industries share in the total GDP was something like 34%, but this has gone down to 28% over a period of 33 decades. You should not be terribly worried about it if it was happening only in the developed world. But go to the next one. Quickly, we'll shift the. You find this is the middle income countries, which includes South Africa, Brazil. There you find the share of industries in the income went up from 34% to about 40% between 1950 and 1990. But after that, after 1990, you again find that the share of industries have started going down. This is low and middle income countries. This is a matter of anxiety and worry. Next one, please. This is China. China, you find that the share of industries had gone up significantly during 70s, and it was maintained. But in recent years, the last decade and a half, you find even China is facing the problem of premature deindustrialization. Come to India, next one. You find India's industrial share has been increasing, but as I mentioned, from 2010 onwards, you do find that the share of industries in GDP has been declining. So, as I was mentioning, that industrial crisis is not something created by the COVID-19. It was there earlier, and in a way, it's a part of the global crisis. The premature deindustrialization is a phenomenon which is being observed in many of the African, Latin American, and Asian countries. And also, there is a thesis of middle income trap. You must have heard about it, that the countries at a very low level of economic development, when they grow, they have cheap labor, they have raw material, they can rise very sharp quickly. But once they go to the middle income level, then they have to compete for sustaining their growth with the developed countries. They have to compete in the global market. And that's where they get stuck. The thesis is that many of the countries grow at a low level, but when they come to the middle level, they cannot grow further. Their per capita income gets stuck between $1,000 to $1,200, as it has happened in Brazil and South Africa. The countries get stuck at that, and India is perhaps heading again towards that, and that's a matter of anxiety. And we should be looking at our manufacturing sector and industrial sector with this concern, that is India falling in the trap of premature deindustrialization, or the middle income trap, wherein our future growth will be questioned. Please go quickly to the next two slides. Again, I have tried to draw and show the thesis of premature deindustrialization for Afghanistan, Argentina, Indonesia, Nigeria, Colombia. You find these are all the graphs for different countries showing a downward trend, which shows that the manufacturing sector's contribution in GDP, in the national income, is declining. It's a global phenomena. Please go down. This is some countries where the sharp fall is not being seen, but nonetheless, there is slightly negative trend. These are countries which have been mentioned above: Liberia, Morocco, Peru, Tanzania, Vietnam, Zimbabwe. Go to the next one, please. Again, this is one country, Thailand, which maintained, like India, maintained a rising share of industries in the income, but recently Thailand has also fallen prey. Now, basically, what I wanted to say is that if India has to get out of this situation, you have to look at the global situation. You can't think that India will claim a large share in the global market just because China may have a bad reputation and China may have problems in the global market in competing with other countries because of certain negativities which have been associated. But it's not going to be very easy for India also, because the world economy is also in a crisis, and there is deindustrialization in many developing countries and the middle income countries. So I would like to say that the state governments first, in order to promote industrial growth, take it forward so that the decline in the share of manufacturing sector does not continue. They identified labor as a problem and went ahead with the labor reform. Please go to the next slide, please. This is again showing these countries which are showing some sort of decline. I think we have seen this graph. Next one. This, yeah, now I think we are repeating. Now look at India's collapse of GDP. You can't see from the right hand side, there is a sharp decline in the rate of economic growth in the first quarter of 2020-21. What was the first quarter of the financial year? That is March, January, February, March is the last year. April, May, June was the first quarter. And do you know what was the growth rate of our GDP? It is 24% negative. Next quarter, April, May, June, July, August, September, again, there was a fall of 8% negative. This is not coming out in the graph. So what is the growth rate of the Indian economy in the last quarter, which is October, October, November, December? The negative growth was stopped. The growth rate was marginally positive. That means it was not a negative. There was no further fall. There was fall for 6 months after COVID came in. The GDP growth rate was negative, but it stopped being negative in the last 3 months of the last year. And now this year, this 3 months, January, February, March, we are looking forward to a growth rate of about 1% in GDP. But as far as the manufacturing sector is concerned, industrial sector is concerned, this gives us a monthly, picture. Sorry, we can make it slightly larger. You see, this is from March, April, May, June. We have for each month the industrial production index. You find in March, it was minus 19%. Industrial production fell by minus 19%. In April 2020, it was 57% negative. It means industrial production and value added became half of what we had in April 2019. Look at the crisis that we had in the industries. The level of industrial output and value added became less than half, because there's a fall of minus 57% in April 2020. Next month, again minus 33% of fall compared to the previous year's same month, that is April, May, June, July, August, all were negative. That means in 2020, these 6 months, the period of negative industrial growth. First time the positive growth was recorded in September by 1%, October by 4.2% compared to the previous year. But again in November, it went down. But now, hopefully, industrial production will pick up, and that's what is being planned by the central and the state government. And as I said, they have undertaken some reform measures. Since I'm going to talk about equity and how the poor are going to be affected, how employment is going to be affected, I will focus on the changes in the labor laws. Please go to the next graph, please. This shows again the fall. You see, this is the index of industrial production. It went down significantly, and now you find from September onwards, again the this this color, pink color, shows the decline. But again, the zero line, it has gone up, and hopefully the growth will be maintained. But quickly, let us look at the state level scenario as far as labor legislations are concerned. Next one. The state which has come to the limelight for maximum relaxation of labor laws and putting forward a local agenda for economic recovery. And this gentleman has been a subject of controversy because of taking some bold measures to bring back the economy on the right lines, but also taking some strong decisions with regard to the labor laws, and that is Uttar Pradesh. Barring the provisions of certain key acts, there are 28 acts which are there in the central government. Only 6 or 7 acts have not been touched, but all the other labor laws have been suspended for about 3 years. For in Uttar Pradesh, the Factories Act, Construction Workers Act, Child Labor Act, Maternity Benefit Act, and Equal Remuneration Act and Bonded Labor Act are the only ones which have not been touched because they pertain to the social stratum. But other laws have been suspended because the chief minister and the government wanted to promote industries which are absolutely needed. Also, I understand, but there are certain implications of making modifications in the other labor laws. But the economy was in a bad shape in Uttar Pradesh. They wanted to bring back the industries and help the industries to start the closed units, and that's why such strong measures have been taken. In Madhya Pradesh, there's one law which is very crucial as far as the employees are concerned, workers are concerned, that is Industrial Disputes Act of 1947, which really does not allow the employer, does not allow the management to dismiss the workers because there is some kind of central government's protection. But even this law has been suspended for the period of 1,000 days, which is more than 3 months. And there have been various exemptions granted in Madhya Pradesh from the Factories Act and of Central Government Factories Act and Madhya Pradesh Factories Act. And for many new units, they are exempt from all labor laws for the period of 6 months at the moment. Go to the next one. I just wanted to uh, just list down the states. You can look at the changes that have been brought in. Gujarat has exempted all factories registered under the Factories Act of 1948 from provisions relating to working hours. One of the major issue with the units when they wanted to start functioning after COVID is non-availability of enough labor. Some laborers were available. They wanted to use the same labor not for 8 hours a day, but for 12 hours a day. And the law did not permit, and law specified that if you go beyond 8 hours, if you make a 9 hour, for that extra hour, you must pay much more than what you paid for a regular 1 hour. So if you are extending the time for 4 hours, you cannot just give the hourly wage. You have to give more than that because you are really taxing the laborer. But that has been suspended. The Gujarat and also for that matter Rajasthan have said that if you increase the hours of work from 8 to 12 hours for the next 3 months, you don't have to pay any extra per hour. Of course, for the 4 hours extra, you will pay some money, but at the same rate as for the others. Himachal Pradesh also have exempted from the provisions of the labor laws, and you can really have flexibility in appointment and hiring and firing principle. because of the state laws. Please go to the next one. The question is this going to help industrialization? It is in a way anti-Keynesian. Keynes had said, strengthen the purchasing power in the hands of the labor so that they can go and spend and there will be effective demand. I understand to some extent this is valid, but to some extent, you must also understand the position of the different state governments because many of the industrialists say that we cannot open our factories unless you allow us to reduce the number of workers because at the moment there is not much of a demand. So something was necessary. I'm not being extra critical of this, but we must realize that in the period of emergency, when the legislations are suspended, the state assemblies are not functioning, the government passes certain rule, passes certain ordinances, and these ordinances may take away some of the rights which the workers have earned over past 3 decades with a long fight. Suddenly those rights tend to disappear, and there is an important judgment made by the Supreme Court in Krishna Kumar Singh and state of Bihar cases. And this is a very, very significant judgment which was given by the Supreme Court. It says that yes, states have the power to make ordinances in such crisis situation when the legislative assemblies are not functioning, but this power can be easily abused. Supreme Court argues that such ordinances and laws must be subject to judicial challenge. State ordinances and amendments must be examined in the context of the Constitution, and if they violate the constitutional rights, they should be struck down. I'm mentioning this because I always argued that in the period of crisis, such decisions have been taken, but these laws which have been revised, modified, and suspended, you must revisit them. And I'm all along arguing that within the period of next, before December 2021, the judicial process must re-examine all these provisions which have been made by the state government and see whether they are tenable. Now, there's another thing which has happened. You are all teachers of economics. You must have noted that three of the South Indian states, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka, have passed orders and also laws. At the moment, Supreme Court has not examined their validity, but the laws and the ordinances say that the state government must reserve jobs of certain categories, particularly at the lower level for the local population. Each state government is facing the problems of unemployment. And in order to play to their own galleries, to their own electorate, they said, okay, we'll create jobs and we'll reserve these jobs for the people who belong to our state. In a way, you can understand the politics behind it because after all, this is the vote bank. But if different states take the position that we will not allow the workers from other states to come, certainly not at the lowest level, but even at the middle level, you make things difficult, then the federal structure gets to a certain extent compromised. Maharashtra and Gujarat are having reservation for the local people in the public sector. And in fact, all Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh, including Maharashtra and Gujarat, have asked the private sector also to give priority to the local people. Again, it is understandable in the context of the high unemployment rate. But if you do that, you segment the labor market into pieces, and that, in a way, in the long term, adversely affect. Maharashtra and Gujarat have also not brought in reservation formally, but say language requirement is necessary. Local language you must speak to get even the middle level or high level jobs. Again, that in a way fragments the labor market. You examine the rhetoric of the politicians in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal, and you do find they're all considering in some way reservation to certain sections of the population because they have to address the local electorate. Now, there are two things I would like to mention here. One is Article 16 of the Constitution, which says that there can be no discrimination on the basis of the place of origin or the state of origin, caste, or any other factor in public sector employment. So many of the public sector which are putting restriction on people from other states can be struck down by the Supreme Court. And Interstate Migrant Workmen Act 1977 that says that you cannot make any distinction in employment on the basis of whether the person comes from within the state or outside the state. So there are constitutional and legal provision in the country. In a panic reaction, many of the state governments are really making a departure from the labor laws and also from recruiting people from other states. I think this is a serious issue. What was allowed and has been allowed in a period of crisis should not become a permanent feature unless a judicial process critically examines them. Please go to the next one. Now, we should talk about the labor codes, and we can have a detailed discussion on the labor codes, which are supposed to promote industrial development, help the manufacturing sector to grow by making things easier for the entrepreneurs, for the management class, but at the same time also strengthen the hands of the working class. The Minister for Labor, Mr. Gangwar, in the central government, has announced that there are historic decisions by the present government in changing the labor codes. There were 29 labor laws. They have been merged into 4 labor codes, and labor codes passed by the parliament cover 500 million workers, both in the organized and unorganized sector. We know that ESIC benefits were not given to all workers in the country. Now, ESIC benefits has been given to all workers in the country, and also EPFO benefits have been extended to all units that are EPFO is employing employees provident fund organization. The provident fund benefits have been extended to all units which are employing 20 plus workers. Before, the provision was some select categories of industries were covered under EPFO. ESIC's employs state insurance corporation. It was earlier restricted to something like 600 districts. Now all the districts have been brought. So in a way it helps. And it talks about, workers, contractors, all traders, all being brought under the labor laws. But there have been serious questions that have been raised. Whether these changes which are being brought in through these 3 labor codes are really making the industrial growth inclusive. Does it really take the benefits to the working class? And unless the working class gets the benefit, the long run growth can be affected, because you must have all trained at some point of time with Keynesian logic. You have to have demand. And even Nirmala Sitharaman in the present in presenting the budget talked about demand support. The question is, some of these changes, significant changes that have been brought through the labor code and also through the modification, amendment of the laws by the central government, and also some changes that have been brought in their implementation by state government, would it really help in the long run? I will just flag 2 or 3 issues. Since you're all interested in this area of research, we should have a free and frank discussion. As I said, I'm not one of those who are strongly condemning these changes because it's going to doom the country and the laborers' future. I really do not think so. But nonetheless, some of the provisions which have been made as short-term arrangements need to be scrutinized. For example, one of the major changes, I will just flag 2 or 3 issues, but I'm sure if you have looked at those labor codes and also the changes in the legislation at the state level, you might be knowing other factors. Earlier, there were certain standard norms for functioning of the industries. If you want to retrench some workers, if you want to dismiss a large number of workers in your firm, not on disciplinary ground, but on other economic reasons, you have to take permission from the central government. All the units that employed 100 workers were under the provision of seeking permission from the central government if you want to change the number of workers in a dramatic manner. That has been modified. Now it's only those units which are employing more than 300 people, not 100, 300 people, which really means 90% of the workers are working in units that employ, you know, less than 300 units. They will not be covered. There will be hire and fire policy for all those establishments where number of workers is less than 300. The exemption limit has been raised from 100 to 300. That is something that one needs to examine. Also, the right to strike for the workers. Please go to the next one. The right to strike for the workers. Earlier, you could had to give a notice of something like month or 15-20 days. Now the notice period has been extended to 60 days. And if anyone takes leave on the day where 75% of the workers have taken leave, even if you say, I'm not joining the strike, but if you take leave on that day where 75% of the workers have not joined, you will be deemed to be on strike. Also, there has been disempowerment of the trade unions. For accidents, there is a financial liability of the employer, but no criminal liability. Earlier, before the courts came in, the final employer was the person responsible for any, you know, compensation to be made, any violation of labor laws. Now they have brought in the contractor also. It is not very clear now to say who is going to be the final responsible person, whether employer or the contractor. There was a limit for the units, the trade unions, which trade union represents the interest of the manufacturing unit. Earlier, it was 50% and below. Now, they have made a clause that unless 75% of the workers are part of the trade union, that trade union cannot be considered as representing the interest of the workers. Also, there are some changes with regard to the compensation, which is to be paid on the basis of the wages. If you are retrenched, if you lose your if you lose your job, then you get certain compensation on the basis of past wages you received in the 6 months. But those wages have been defined now in a much narrower sense. It does not include many of the allowances. It's just the basic wage, basic salary, which is to be counted, not the total benefits. These are some of the issues which is disturbing me, and I do believe that if industrial growth and the private corporate sector led industrial growth has to sustain, has to continue, and do not fall in the trap of premature deindustrialization or middle income trap, I personally believe that we have to critically examine the measures that the central and the state government have taken in the period of crisis. Unless you do that, the long-term growth prospect may be jeopardized. I'll just take another 2 minutes before I open up for a discussion. Please go to the next slide, please. Now, there have been relaxation of labor laws in Gujarat, Rajasthan, and Andhra Pradesh, and there is no evidence that if you relax the labor laws, automatically you have high rate of industrial growth. You don't get that empirically. So we are not very sure whether relaxation of labor laws is going to be a very important factor in economic recovery of the country. In case of Gujarat, we do notice that because of the relaxation of labor laws, Gujarat's economic growth did pick up. But Gujarat went on the path of capital intensive growth, not labor intensive growth. We have massive unemployment. It's a major problem for the Indian economy for the last 2 years have been rising unemployment, and that needs to be addressed. Please, next one, please. Now, I just wanted to refer to one historical incident. It should make us think, reflect. I'm not saying one can draw parallel between today's situation and the 14th century England. England was hit, whole of Europe was hit by, black death, the bubonic plague, which killed in many countries much more people, many more people than by COVID 19. 30% of the population of many of the cities were just wiped out. That was somewhere in 1340s, 1348, 45. And as a result of that, the economy also collapsed. But many of the European countries thought that to bring back the economy on the right track, you need to discipline the laborers. So there was an ordinance of laborers which was brought in 1349, and it became the statute. It became the law which allowed the industrialists to pay the workers only the starvation wage and not more than that, because they thought the industrialists would be encouraged to invest in industries if the laborers' demand for higher wages can be controlled. So industrialists were permitted by the Ordinance of Laborer, which was in 1349, to restrict the wages and no increase. And also, beside that, there was a statute which said that no person can move from one place to another, because they wanted to ensure that the industrialists get the adequate supply of labor. As a result of that, laboring class got exploited, and there was a huge revolt that's called peasant revolt, but all the workers joined that. That was 1381. They broke out in parts of England. That's the first popular uprising in history. I'm saying situation is not as bad as that, but nonetheless, if we have made some changes in the labor legislation just to bring out the Indian manufacturing sector out of the ICU, where it was pushed by the COVID. But even before that, there were structural problems. If you want to address that, you have to have your focus, policy focus, much larger than the labor market. You have to see to it that you generate adequate income and purchasing power in the hands of those, not those who were working from home and had suffered in many ways, but we should be talking about those who lost their jobs, who didn't have food to eat. They had to, force they are forced to go out of their houses looking for employment. That section must be addressed. I can understand there was pressure on our honorable finance minister to give some concessions to the middle class in taxes, which she did not give, which I'm not really very unhappy about, because the middle class, which was working from home, certainly had unspent money. At least 40% of the consumption expenditure during 8 months of lockdown have not been spent, and they will bring out that unspent money in the market in any case for the next 2 3 quarters. There is no problem. The middle class has a lot of money which it has saved during the pandemic period. But think about those who did not have any income. Unless you generate income by providing infrastructure and MSME, small and medium scale industries, I don't think economy will be on a sustainable path in the long run. And I would therefore submit that the government should consider that section of the population much more with a sharper focus that suffered in terms of livelihood during the period of pandemic. I know, I was looking at the budget, there was a big demand that those households whose medical expenditure was something like 3 lakhs, 4 lakhs because of the COVID infection, they need to be compensated. And to some extent, well, medical expenditure has gone up. But think about those Not those only who spend 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs, 4 lakhs, just to get out of COVID situation for their family members. But there were families which lost their family members because they did not have 500 rupees for the treatment. They didn't have 200 rupees for testing. They died without testing. So I think for we should be looking at the labor laws in the context of the bottom sections of the population, so that just not the immediate boosting to the industries, but the long-term sustainability of the industries can be addressed by really generating employment and giving purchasing power in the hands of the poor and marginalized section. We can go to the next one. This is the last slide. I just wanted to mention there are two ways by which we can strengthen the working class. One is we strengthen the rights of each individual worker, give them social security benefit, and give them right to participate in the decision making in some form with the management. This is individual labor empowerment. The second is you empower the trade unions so that they can negotiate more effectively. What has presently happened, I must say, that the codes that have been passed by the central government strengthen the individual workers, give social security to individual workers, but somehow it has weakened the trade unions. One can always argue that the trade unions never represented the marginalized section. The poorest of the poor were not part of the trade unions. One can take that position, but nonetheless, as students and teachers of economics, we should discuss the new paradigm shift that has taken place. What is happening is that we are trying to strengthen individual workers, but at the same time, the trade unions, the workers' union, are not getting empowered. Whether that is a desirable situation, what about the implications? I think these are the serious issues. As all of us, as researchers, we should be in a position to consider them to ensure that the industrial recovery becomes sustainable in the long run. Rama, I would stop here. We have half an hour time at least for questions and answers. We can take that in the discussion session.
Thank you so much, Professor Kundu, for this
Was I
elaborate.
audible for all full
Very
time?
clear, sir. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.